In 3, 2, 1. Welcome to The Peaceful Truth, the podcast where we talk about everything from feminism, women empowerment, and everything in between. I am your host for today, Kenzie Meekbeck, and I am joined by Kim. So Kim, do you want to tell us why you're here today?
Sure. First off, thanks so much for having me. This is my first podcast, so...
Oh, well, we're honored to have you.
Let's see how this goes.
And can you tell us about the Fresh Tangerine a little bit?
Sure. So Fresh Tangerine is a handmade jewelry line that I started 7 years ago. When I was 24, I was living in Portland at the time and working at a call center, which was not a very glamorous job. And so I was feeling kind of unfulfilled and a little bit lost. And so jewelry was something that I always did as a hobby. And so I just kind of decided to make some stuff and see if people liked it. And they did. And so 7 years later, here I am.
I think that's so important, but I'm going to really tell our viewers really fast. Megan isn't here today due to unforeseen circumstances, so she'll be back next week. But anyway, continuing on forward, but that is so cool. I feel like probably a lot of people feel that way. Just you think your job that you get off the bat is going to be your dream job. You know, you're hopeful, or you think, hey, this job is going to be pretty good, like the call center one, but to recognize that and to empower yourself to think of like something that you know is going to be wonderful. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. And for me, before working at the call center, I had spent a year in France teaching English. And I came back, and this was kind of my first job in the corporate world and in kind of a work environment outside of school or being in schools. And I quickly realized that what was important to me was to have a fulfilling career. I wasn't ever going to be someone who could just clock in, clock out, take home a paycheck. Like, I had to be really passionate about what I was doing. And I think ultimately just like working for myself.
Yeah, and I can totally relate to that, and I feel like a lot of women can. So I'm glad you're here maybe to give us some advice. Yeah. So we'd like to start off, though, before we get into the nitty-gritty of your awesome business, we like to review past episodes. So on our very first episodes, we told stories about times where other women have empowered us. Can you tell us about a time that a woman has empowered you?
Sure. This actually goes back to the very beginning of starting my business. One of the things that I did when I was first getting started is I looked for different resources in the area to kind of see what was out there and what I could learn. And I found this talk that it was between two jewelers in Portland, and it was all about like how to sell your jewelry to other stores. So I signed up and I went, and at the end of the talk, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed by just like how much work it takes. And I wasn't sure if I had what it took to make it. And so I went up to one of the jewelers afterwards, and her name is Betsy. She has a line, Betsy and Aya, in Portland, that's very successful.
Cool.
And I just asked her, I was like, this is so amazing. Like, how did you do this? Like, I want to do, what you're doing. And like, I just don't know if I like have what it takes. And she was immediately so warm and encouraging, and she didn't hesitate for 1 second. She was like, if you want to do it, like, you will be successful and you can make it happen. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was such an important moment because from her side of things, she is in a pretty saturated industry. Like, handmade jewelry is pretty competitive, and she could have easily saw me as a threat or competition and discouraged me from starting a line, but she was just the opposite. She was so warm and lovely, and I think about that moment a lot.
That's wonderful. And I feel like it's so important nowadays be in this movement that is happening with women to empower each other and realize, I feel like the past culture was pretty different, where you were worried where it's kind of catty, or you're worried about, competitiveness between women. But do you feel like lately women have kind of broken down those walls for each other and become a warm environment for everyone recently?
Yeah, I think it takes constant work. There's so many things that women are taught from such a young age, and we have to really work to break down those barriers and unlearn all of the things that we learned growing up.
It's definitely hard.
And it's changing. I think that like it takes other women being vulnerable and just talking about these things.
Yeah, most definitely. So on episode 2, we gave our opinions on catcalling and kind of told our own experience. So do you have any thoughts
man.
or opinions
I
on
have
this? Or even a story?
probably too many stories. Like one recently, I was just like walking down the street. So my store and my studio is in Pioneer Square.
Oh, cool.
And for those people who don't live in Seattle, it's kind of like a mixed bag of people, like all kinds of, there are a lot of missions. So there are a lot of homeless people, but also a lot of business people and tourists. And it's a little bit crazy. And I was just walking down the street and this guy turns to me and yells and he goes, "Look, there's America's Next Top Model walking down the street." And I was just like, didn't even know how to react.
Yeah.
But I think like catcalling is something that's hard for me. It happens quite a bit. And I find myself like I think about that when I get dressed in the morning, and sometimes I'll change what I want to wear, what I look like, so that I won't get those catcalls.
And that's unfair. Like
Yeah.
you're not asking for anything.
Exactly.
You're just being creative in how you're dressing and expressing yourself. So that's not very fair. But yeah, definitely. We definitely agree with you on that one. So going back to your business, tell your story of how you began your interest in jewelry. You mentioned it was very young to me. So
Yeah, so I started making jewelry when I was about 7 years old.
Wow.
Just with like big plastic beads and making like kind of like big bracelets. My mom,
the 90s.
yeah, like the 90s look. My mom kind of like was a big crafter, and we grew up making all kinds of different things. And so she would do like during the holidays, she would sell ornaments and different things at like the school craft fair. And so I decided to start making bracelets so that I could sell them and like buy things that I wanted, like dolls or books. And so that's kind of how I got started. And then I just found that like throughout my life, it was something that relaxed me and worked as kind of a de-stressor. So I just kept it as a hobby for a while. And my very first job was actually at like a bead store. And I didn't even work for money. It was just for store credit so that I could buy supplies to make jewelry.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really cool. That's awesome. So can you describe your design and jewelry style? So it's the Fresh Tangerine, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So when they look it up, what will they see and why this style?
Yeah, so I focus on jewelry that's delicate and affordable and made for everyday wear. I'm someone who likes to put on the same pieces and just wear them and forget about them. So it's really important to me that they're light, and I like a really simple style. And then I want to give our customers pieces that are affordable, but that are also going to last.
That's really cool. So what are your price ranges for people?
So everything is under $100.
Wow.
Most pieces are like under 50.
Wow, that's pretty good.
And they're going to last for a while. We use 14 karat gold fill and sterling silver, which are both hypoallergenic metals, and they're made for long-term wear. Like for the gold, like it's not a plating, it's a thick coating of gold, so it's not going to wear off and tarnish.
Right. And that's definitely me. Like I wear this necklace every day and I like put it on and don't think about it. You know what I mean? That's definitely my style as well. That's really cool. So how did this grow from being more of a hobby as a child into a business? And can you tell me, I didn't even realize, which I apologize, I didn't realize, but you just opened your first storefront, which is so inspiring to me, like that you went from a child, you went to the call center and you're like, you know what, screw it, I'm going to go for it. So can you tell me like how all this happened?
For sure. So I was working at the call center. I was 24 years old, and I just decided that I didn't really want to work in like a desk job at all. And so I actually wanted to get back. I had spent a year teaching English in France, and I wanted to go back and be able to travel. So I just kind of went to a coffee shop and I made a list of all the different skills that I had, and jewelry was one of them. And I was like, well, I can make jewelry, sell it online, and kind of have like a side income if I wanted to go back to France. And so that's kind of how everything started. And I made a bunch of stuff and I sold at a few different shows in Portland, and people were so interested in the jewelry that I decided to continue. And so I actually worked full time at the call center for a year and did jewelry on the side, and then was able to quit my job.
And do it full time.
And do it full time.
How rewarding. That's really cool. So what has been or where do you sell your pieces now? And that kind of answers that question. You just opened up a storefront, but how, I guess you sold it online and did you put it in other shops? You know, I see some different designers in different shops.
For sure. So I started out just selling online in person at different craft shows and then selling to other stores. And then moving to Seattle. So I started my business in Portland, and then a few years in, I decided to move to Seattle to grow it. And I continued to sell online, and I did in-person shows to kind of get the word out and build a customer base here. And I still wholesale to a lot of different boutiques in the area. And then I decided to open a storefront just to have a better, you know, experience for my customers and to be able to relate to them in person, one-on-one, without having to do craft shows.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So is this a pretty competitive industry, would you say?
I would say like handmade jewelry is very saturated for sure. There are a lot of different lines, and there was kind of this trend of minimal, delicate jewelry that came about. And so I would say that it is fairly competitive, but I try not to focus on what other people are doing. And I think that if you're sharing your true, authentic voice, then there's room for everyone.
That's really cool. I like that mindset. And that's how I felt too. Someone approached me about starting a podcast about a similar topic. And I immediately was like, yes, how can I help you? Because, you know, if you're passionate about it, you want it to be out there in the world. For sure.
and no one, you know, we're all so different and unique, and no one will ever present something in the same way as you.
Most definitely. I completely agree. So what has been your challenge being a woman with your own business? Has there been any challenges you've come across?
Yeah, I would say that the biggest challenge that I face day to day has to do with perception, people's perception of me and how I interpret that. I try not to focus on like what other people are doing in the industry, but I'm a pretty sensitive person, and the things that people say, like you have to grow kind of a thick skin. And so that is the thing that I struggle with the most, is like thinking about how people are going to interpret my choices.
Yeah, that's definitely good advice. So let's see. So how do you design the jewelry? You mentioned that it's 14 karat gold
fill. Yeah.
Fill. So I don't even know what that means. How do you mold it? How do you do it?
Yeah. So all of the pieces start out as just like different sizes of wire. And I usually go in, I'm a tactile person. So I like to go in and just work with the metal, and I'll kind of designate some studio time by myself and just make a bunch of stuff and see what flows. And then after that, I have to decide, you know, is this something that our customers want? Is it, you know, will it fall into the under $100 category? How complicated is it to reproduce? And then from there, we whittle down the designs to create a collection.
That's really cool. Is it completely solo, or do you have any help with you?
So the design process is pretty much just on me. And then I have a few employees, and then I'll get their input, and we'll have talks about like, you know, for us, we have to be able to make the same pieces hundreds and thousands of times. So we have to talk about like, how easy is this for someone else to recreate? Wow. You know, someone who doesn't, can I train someone to make a piece? Can we write down kind of the recipe for it?
Wow, that's really cool. That's really neat. So I guess, where do you get the materials? You mentioned you like to go feel them and touch them and that sort of thing.
So we try to source as much as we can, like within the US, and we try to use recycled metals as much as possible. So usually like I have a couple of online sources that I'll go to get like the basic, like the wire and chain and clasps and things. And then sometimes I'll work with natural stones, and I'll try and source those from different places.
That's really cool.
I think a few years ago I did a line where I actually went to Indonesia, and I went to a gem market, and I collected all of the stones and then brought them back and made a whole collection.
Like an exclusive line, because it's hard to go back. And
like you can't go back.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you mentioned you're passionate for jewelry. That's how this business originated. But what I think isn't talked about enough is like the nitty gritty of actually starting a business. You mentioned you have employees. You found a storefront.
For sure.
Was that in your realm, and how did you figure that stuff out? Like that's hard and almost intimidating.
Yeah. So when I started my business, I did never think that I was going to have employees. Like my goal was just to like make jewelry all day and like maybe have a studio most likely at home. And then the business quickly changed and it grew to a point where I was forced to find help. And that kind of, when I hired my first employees, that was back in 2014, it kind of changed everything. It changed the mission and why I wanted to continue on. But it's been challenging. Like I don't have any business experience. I went to a like tiny liberal arts college and I majored in math and French. So I think that the biggest skill that I have is I'm a problem solver. And so anything that I don't know how to do, I will ask around or I'll research and just kind of figure it out.
That's really cool. And just creating and having employees, that's awesome. That's really awesome. So we already answered that this is your full-time job. Yeah. So who has empowered you to get to this point? You mentioned the woman at the very beginning who you went to her class, or was it a workshop, I guess?
It was just like a talk.
Okay, her talk, and she empowered you. Has there been anyone else along the line who's kind of contributed to this?
I would say that like my customers are who empower me to continue doing what I'm doing. Without them, I wouldn't have a business. And so everything that I do is to create a positive experience for them.
And I'm sure that energy is felt like within your customers too.
I hope
I'm
so.
sure that's how you continue.
Yeah. So as long as people are interested in what I have to say, I will continue doing what I love to do.
So what has been your biggest driver to gain new customers? Like, how do you get that outreach? Right now, I think with our podcast, and we'll just be perfectly honest, we continue wanting to expand our growth, but it's hard. It is. It's really hard to get the word out there. Yeah. So how did you expand for jewelry? That's probably a different realm than us, but how did you expand that way?
Yeah. So I would say like our biggest driver has been Instagram. And then I've worked with a lot of different like style bloggers and people in the community. And it's kind of that mentality like of word of mouth. And it's not always like in-person contact, but that's very much what blogging embodies for me, is kind of like someone's sharing their opinion and it's like talking to a friend, you know, whose style that you admire.
Yeah, that's really cool. So have you ever, and I don't know, since it kind of seems female dominated besides probably several awesome men, but have you ever faced discrimination in this line of work?
Of course.
Really? How so?
It's something that I deal with almost daily.
Wow.
You know, I was pretty young when I started my business, 24. I'm a young business owner now. I'm 31, and people don't realize that, you know, I have a store and that I have employees. And I think that people see me and they just make assumptions. I can tell, like, when someone asks me what I do, I'll say, you know, I own a handmade jewelry line, and their voice immediately shifts and they'll say, oh, like, that's so cute. And I'm like, well, sure.
Like, look at what you started, though. You know what I mean? Like, from a call center to owning your own storefront and having so employees.
People that's just insane. Like, I remember being at a friend's wedding, and this, like, someone at the wedding was asking me what I did, and I said I have a handmade jewelry line, and he just assumed, he went straight to, like, he asked me if I was a high school dropout. And I was like, that's such a weird thing to just say to someone. I was like, you know, no, like, I actually graduated with a degree, and like, this is just something that makes me happy. And it's interesting.
This is a question I didn't send you previously. I sent her the questions, but how would do you have any advice for women who face that similar feedback, I guess? Like, if you get discouraged like that, how do you block out that noise, I guess?
For sure. For me, it's hard. You just kind of have to grow a thick skin. And unfortunately, it's something that, like, we will continue to have to deal with. And I like to correct people, and, you know, they'll say, like, that's a cute business. And I'm like, it is cute, but also, like, I'm a real business owner. Like, I do all of the same things that, you know, so anyone else does. And it's inappropriate. Like, people ask me how I pay my rent. And so I'll just say, I pay my rent the same way that you do.
I have a job.
You know, I have a job and I write a check. Like, this is just really invasive. So I think just, like, setting the boundary and telling people when that happens that it's inappropriate for them is just how we move forward.
That's really cool.
But it's interesting. Like, I notice that I will think about, whatever event I'm going to, and I will change how I look for that event. Like if I'm meeting with my landlord, I'm going to wear something that's super professional, and I'm going to try and make myself look older so that he takes me more seriously. Whereas like if I'm going to like a blogging event, then I get to be more creative with my style. And it's not something that we should have to think about, but I think that we do, and it's important.
Yeah, whatever comes naturally should just be
Yeah.
how it is. That's definitely for sure. But sometimes you kind of just feel awesome when you dress up.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like, I kind of dress and I'll make these little like notes. Like the other day I had to go to a community meeting in Pioneer Square, and I was like, I'm going to dress like a really awesome business owner. And I felt so empowered. I wore all of my favorite things, and I put on my favorite red lipstick, and I just felt like such a
like
badass.
me today. Yeah, definitely.
So
you look in the mirror, you're like, heck yeah.
It can be positive as well.
Definitely. Yeah, whatever your style is, for sure. And if you're not in the mood, you're not in the mood. So I guess this is a very broad question, but how does this business empower you? It clearly does. So how does it empower you?
I think, it's so interesting when you start a business, you don't really know what you're getting into. Unfortunately, I was just young and naive enough to not really know how hard it was going to be.
Sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah. But what I love about owning a business is that it forces me to face my fears, and it's constantly pushing me to step outside of my comfort zone. And I've grown so much as a person. Like even like public speaking, this is a challenge for me, and it's something that I really wanted to do because it's important for my business and the growth of my business. I'm someone who's a really private person, and I'm learning that it's important for me to share my story and details about my life. And I wouldn't be pushed to do that if I didn't have a business and a platform to share it.
And not only that, of like starting, and I know this, like it's intimidating to walk into a setup, but like this, but when, I think it's important to share your story, not only to spread the word of your business, but you never know which woman will randomly hear this, and you might have created something just by inspiring her without even knowing.
For sure.
So where do women find your work? Like, where online can we look you up? Where's your storefront? How can we find you? If girls are like, heck yeah, I need to see this line now.
Everything is available for sale on our website, freshtangerine.com. We're on Instagram. We post a lot there. The store is in Pioneer Square in Seattle, which is just south of downtown. And then on our website as well, you can find all of the different stores that we sell to throughout the world, if you're wanting to see pieces in person and don't live in Seattle.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. How we like to wrap up our podcast is on, even though this whole one was very positive, sometimes we have darker topics. Yeah. Do you have anything positive you're looking forward to this week? Anything like that? Like the sun, or looking forward to work or anything like that?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to working in my store and getting into the studio and maybe creating some new pieces.
Awesome. Well, we'll look forward to seeing that. And I'm just looking forward to the sun right now. We've had a winter. Great. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Bye, guys.
Bye.